Okay, sexual reproduction. We know that in multicellular organisms, we see variety. I put the pictures of the dogs just to show some of the more extreme varieties that we see. In our case, we've artificially bred them to have certain characteristics, but the bottom line is the variation still comes from sexual reproduction. But here's the thing, if in theory, if based on the hypothesis that scientists have that originally everything would have started from one cell, obviously sexual reproduction couldn't have been the first form of reproduction because there would have only been one cell. So the question that scientists would pose is, why would sexual reproduction have appeared in the first place? If originally you had cells and the cells could reproduce asexually, what would have been the benefit of sexual reproduction? So first, let's talk about benefits of asexual reproduction, because there are benefits to reproducing asexually. Asexual reproduction exists in nature. Budding, I mentioned this to you before about how a potato can grow little eyes on it, and each one of those can pop off and grow into a new potato. So that's budding. We also see it in animals. Sponges have budding. Hydra, I'm going to show you a picture of a Hydra on the next slide. It's looks kind of like it's related to jellyfish. They have budding, where a little baby buds off the side. Binary fission is what bacteria do. They split in half and make exact copies of themselves. And obviously there are way more bacteria on the planet than humans, so this is working for them. And then there's a very unusual thing called parthenogenesis, which is where an unfertilized egg actually develops, ends up diploid, and develops into a full organism. This does occur normally in certain things like bees. In bees, you see that the workers are sterile. They're all female, and they are all basically parthenogenic. They come from one parent, but it's an asexual reproduction, but they are diploid. This was a unique situation in my little picture there, a Komodo dragon. There was a female at a zoo, and she was never around a male. She laid eggs, and the eggs actually hatched into babies. So it was a very unusual case of parthenogenesis. And those babies technically would all be sort of like clones of her. It's asexual reproduction. We also know that plants, even though plants can reproduce sexually, in some cases, if it's a harsh environment, they will reproduce asexually. So, and the benefit of that is, number one, you don't need a partner. And number two, if they already have a good gene combination, it's going to be beneficial to reproduce asexually and just make lots and lots of copies. So if they're living in a harsh area and the gene combination they have is working for them, it makes sense. I'll just make lots and lots of copies exactly like me because I know they're going to survive just like me. The drawback of asexual reproduction, though, is that since you only have one parent, number one, if there's any kind of damage to your genome, a mutation that's bad, every offspring from you is going to have that same mutation. There's no way to repair it. And secondly, in this case, if there's a weakness, if the environment changes and now you don't have a great genetic composition to survive in that environment, neither will anybody else because they're all exactly like you. So it can be beneficial. Here's budding, by the way, in a Hydra. That's the little baby. It's a clone of the original, and it breaks off and swims away, and it's a Hydra on its own. So, benefits of sexual reproduction. Well, we know that, for example, some protists, little pond organisms that are haploid, they will actually fuse together and form a diploid cell. Literally form a cell with two sets of chromosomes. The chromosomes actually can switch pieces of DNA with each other, and a chromosome that's missing a piece, for example, enzymes would come in and repair it. So by actually fusing together, it gives them an opportunity to repair damage. Whereas in asexual reproduction, if something's damaged, it's just going to get passed on that way. This is not actually sexual reproduction because they don't make any babies. The male, not the male and the female, the two parameciums, they fuse together, but then they separate back apart again. Nobody's pregnant, nobody lays eggs, nobody has babies as a result of them hooking up. But it's sort of like a precursor to sexual reproduction because it's an opportunity for two sets of DNA to sort of mingle together and fix problems. So we think that meiosis, the process we're going to be talking about, that cuts chromosomes in half and then puts them back together again, is sort of a mechanism that allowed chromosomes to be repaired. It allowed the exchange of information between chromosomes, and then the chromosomes could then split back off, go their separate ways, but each one of them would be slightly different from what it was before, and in a lot of cases be fixed. The main benefit of sexual reproduction is variation. That even though in asexual reproduction, everybody being the same can be a good thing, variation can be an even better thing because it allows us to adapt to constantly changing environments. Since we're all different, as a species, we're more likely to be able to survive if the environment changes, or in different areas where it's hotter or colder, where the elevation is higher or lower, or whatever the characteristics of that environment are. Chances are certain genetic combinations will make it easier for us to survive, and as a species, we can then carry on. So that's the main benefit of sexual reproduction. This is a picture of the paramecium that I was talking about, where they fuse together and they exchange genetic information. All right, chromosomes. We talked about this prior to break. How somatic cells, which is, remember, just another word for a body cell. So somatic cell is just a body cell. And somatic cells have 2 copies of every chromosome. We're what's called diploid. And in humans, our diploid number is 46. So every body cell has 46 chromosomes. Now, in addition to that, I showed you, and if you did your lab, that you can organize them in a picture, a karyotype, where you can match them up. Each one has a partner. And if we were to match them up, what we see is 22 of the 23 pairs are called autosomes. And they basically control all sorts of characteristics about you that have nothing to do with whether you're male or female. And then you have 1 pair of sex chromosomes, and their job, well, among other things, is to determine whether you're male or female. It turns out that the X chromosome, and we'll talk about it later, has a lot of other necessary information. A person could not survive without at least 1 X chromosome. A person can survive without a Y chromosome, but no females have a Y chromosome for one thing. But if you don't have at least 1 X chromosome, you would not be able to survive because there's other information on there besides just making you female. So in humans, our sex chromosomes, you have XX, which is a female, and XY, which is a male. This is not the same in all organisms. You may remember Otter John last week talking about how an alligator's temperature determines male-female. So I don't know if they don't even have sex chromosomes, that they basically, their genes are just influenced by environment. Our genes are influenced by the environment too. Certain genes, for example, genes to produce skin pigments are turned on when we go out in the sun. That's why we get a tan. So in the case of their sex, it may just be that they all have the same genes, but certain genes get turned on to make them male or female based on temperature outside. In birds, it's the opposite. Males, I believe, are ZZ. They use Z and W instead of X and Y. And females are ZW. So the female would determine the sex of the babies rather than a male in birds. So it's not the same in all organisms. But in humans, this is our situation. Here's the picture of the karyotype again that I showed you before. Just explaining again that our chromosomes are in pairs. So we have pair number 1, pair number 2, and so there's 46 total chromosomes, but technically there's only 23 completely different kinds of chromosomes. For example, if, let's say, hair color was, or curly versus straight hair. In fact, easier ones, widow's peak, right? Widow's peak, the little point here, is a simple trait. If you have one, you're dominant. If you don't have one, you're recessive. So let's just pretend like widow's peak is one of the genes that's carried on chromosome 1. That would mean that any other chromosome I look at is going to have absolutely no information about widow's peak, but both of these would have information. It wouldn't mean that the information is the same, though, because one of these chromosomes originated from your father and one came from your mom. So it's possible that maybe your mom gave you a chromosome for no widow's peak, and your dad gave you one to have widow's peak. So they don't have the same identical information, but they do have information about the same trait. Then genetics, we talk about, oh, but if widow's peak is dominant, then you would actually show a widow's peak, whereas if it's recessive, you know, you would be carrying it, but you wouldn't show it, and there's the whole genetics aspect to it. But does that make sense that each pair, that you have 2 copies of each one, and they carry similar information? Okay, so that is a little bit about that. So that means that in sexual reproduction, what's going to happen is we need to only give 1 copy. If we did not do that, what would happen is in every single generation, our chromosome number would double. Because if I have 46, husband has 46, baby would have 92, which does not make super baby. It makes no baby. There are no animals that can survive with a whole extra set of chromosomes. And in most cases, you can't survive with just 1 extra chromosome without typically severe side effects to that. So extra chromosomes is not a good thing, nor is missing chromosomes. And so basically this just explains that in sexual reproduction, only 1 copy is going to be donated. The purpose of meiosis, the only purpose of meiosis is this. It's the one that's going to cut that chromosome number in half. It's the process that's going to create the sperm and eggs. So you do not have meiosis going on in any other cells of your body. Skin cells aren't undergoing meiosis. Blood cells aren't undergoing meiosis because there's no need for it. Blood cells are not looking for another sexy blood cell to make baby blood cells. You just make exact copies of blood cells and skin cells and bone cells. So the only cells in us that undergo meiosis are sperm and egg cells, or at least the pre-sperm and pre-egg cells, which will become sperm and egg. So our haploid number is 23. So N, our base number of different kinds of chromosomes, is 23. All right. And this just explains, again, that out of the 23, 22 of them would be autosomes, and 1 would be a sex chromosome. In an egg, since females are XX, the only possibility that a female can give when she makes eggs is an X. But a male, who is XY, again gives 1 copy. He can either give an X, or he could give a Y. And that's why the male is going to be the one that's going to determine the sex of the offspring. If he gives an X, you get a female. If he gives a Y, then you get a male. And so that's something specifically in humans. It may be in all mammals for that matter, but not necessarily in all other animals, not necessarily in birds or reptiles or any other animals. Okay, this is just a diagram showing the same thing. If this organism has a diploid number of 6, in other words, a body cell has 6 chromosomes, where did they come from? Well, from the original cell that was made when the sperm met the egg. 3 of those chromosomes came from the mom, 3 of those chromosomes came from the dad, and now they're matching pairs. So these 2 chromosomes are a pair, these 2 are a pair, and these 2 are a pair. When this organism goes to make offspring, they will turn around again and give 1 from each of those pairs to the offspring. Okay, preparing for sex. Dim the lights. No, just kidding. Okay. Meiosis. Preparation for sexual reproduction is meiosis. The purpose of meiosis, like I said, is to cut the chromosome number in half. That's the only reason it happens, and that's why it only happens in sex cells, not in any other cells in your body. When sexual reproduction happens, it's going to basically be the union of those 2 haploid cells, and that is going to then restore the original chromosome number. So all sexually reproducing organisms are going to go from diploid to haploid to diploid.